taking on that challenge for next week. I had a great opportunity to be in worship last night at Salem with my husband and my son. It's very rare that the three of us are actually in the same worship service at the same time. So that was kind of exciting. And I always like to let you know when I'm speaking or doing things out and about, so that if people you know are at these events, you won't be surprised and say, oh, your pastor was, was with us. But I was with the Church Women United of Illinois, which many of you may be familiar with. It's an ecumenical women's group. And the Illinois State Gathering was about 15 minutes away from us in Indian Head Park, and I was their Bible study teacher yesterday morning. And they have invited me to come to their regional event in October of 2014, a 6-state gathering. And one woman actually came up to me and said, don't get nervous when I tell you this, they're an Episcopal church and they were looking for a pastor, and she says, you're exactly what we want. And so I was flattered, and I said, I'm going to tell my congregation that you said that, but they will kill me if I said, we've already been on a journey, so we're not going anywhere. I said, I'm happy to share your posting with others in the Divinity School Network who'll be looking for a pastor, but I'm not looking for a church, so it's very nice of her. It's very nice of her to say that there, so it felt good, but yeah, that was pretty funny. I was like, no, I don't think we're going to do that. If you've ever gone through the ordination process in the Episcopal Church, it's not an easy process whatsoever. But I did introduce myself to the pastor of that church, Lionsville Congregational Church, and also met a lovely woman from First Congregational in Downers Grove who came over to me, and we talked about the connection that our churches have through PADS and their new pastor, Scott, and they were looking for a place to possibly hold a baptism, and they know that we have a baptistry, so someone wants to be immersed, so we may hear from them about using our baptistry, and of course I told her that we'd be happy to share the space. So it's always good to make connections with our church around the metro area, so it was a fun time. Exciting women who are working very actively on social justice issues. There was a woman talking about the handgun violence legislation here in Illinois, someone else talking about UNICEF, someone else talking about farm worker justice. So an older group of women who are really pretty active. They're looking for members under 50. And I was sad to say that I did not meet that criteria. Great, great time. Well, today we're talking about a familiar story. Jesus has been resurrected and appears to his disciples after they've been out fishing unsuccessfully. And I've entitled this sermon, Feed My Sheep, and because I planned these things ahead, if I had been thinking as I prepared in the last couple of weeks, I probably would have given it a different title. I do have done over the years a lot of premarital classes at Salem, which are pretty structured. And one of the titles, one of the segments that I'm always asked to present on is communication in relationships. And there's a book entitled The 5 Love Languages, written by Gary Smalley, who some of you may have heard of. It's a good case of someone whose theology and politics you might not agree with, but you actually agree with their concepts. But it's a real interesting book called The 5 Love Languages. And for many of you who've taken personality tests like Myers-Briggs, or you learn how to interact, the 5 love languages is similar to that. And I want to share these with you and see if any of these fit you. One language is gifts. You might be somebody who just loves getting gifts, and unless the people in your life that you care about, be they your partner or spouse or whomever, you don't really feel loved unless someone's giving you a gift. You may also be the type of person who gives gifts as a way of showing love and appreciation. And there are some people who just don't feel right or feel appreciated unless they get tangible gifts at the right time of year. Many women are accused of having this language of gifts, that we like nice gifts of jewelry and clothes as opposed to washers and dryers and irons and vacuum cleaners. So I would be one in that camp. Some of us really appreciate quality time. You're not so concerned about whether you get gifts from your special someone, but maybe it's just really important that you spend time with that person. That's probably one of my languages, and it was from the time Walter and I were dating. We were both really busy even as young adults, and I just enjoyed the time to sit across the table and talk with him and not be, a spectator in the audience when he was doing concerts or worship service. I really valued that kind of time. And so some of us may feel that unless we get that kind of time, we're just not getting what we need in terms of love. And there may be some people who are willing to spend time, but maybe gifts is not their thing, but they need you to understand they do want to spend time with you. Another language is words of affirmation. There are some people who need to be affirmed. There are some people who need to hear from others that you think they're strong and smart and pretty and capable and interesting and all of those things. And there are some people who not only need to hear it, but there are others who use those kinds of affirming language to let you know that they think you're pretty special or important. And acts of kindness. There are some people who express their love and their care by just doing stuff for you. My husband is a good man about the house, and he has said to me more than once that one of the ways he shows his love is by making sure the yard is taken care of and that things are fixed around the house. And you need to learn to listen. This is the language of love languages. You have to learn to listen to the language that the other person speaks in order to both receive the love that they're trying to give you and also to express love in a way that they will understand. And finally, there's physical touch. Now, we understand what that means in the context of a committed romantic relationship or marriage, but even some of us are huggers and some of us are not. And there are some people that when they greet you, they're like, oh, don't shake hands, I'm a hugger. And you may think they're being a little too forward because we've just met, but that is the way some people express their friendship and their appreciation. Well, in today's text, I'd like to suggest that Jesus actually has his own love language. He has a way in which he both understands how we love him and a way in which he expresses his love to us. If you can imagine Peter's conflict, internal conflict, I'm sure. They recognize Jesus just 100 yards off of the shore after they've been fishing, and they realize when they find the fish on the right side of the boat as he's taught them that, yeah, that's Jesus, it is the Lord. Peter has had some other interactions with Jesus after his resurrection. Remember, Peter is the one who swore up and down that he would not deny Jesus, and yet he obviously does, as Jesus had predicted. Imagine the first time that Peter confronts Jesus. This is probably the third time that they've had some interactions. So for Jesus to ask Peter a question, Peter, do you love me? And the text translates this as, do you love me more than these? I imagine Peter was pretty intent on convincing Jesus that despite what had happened previously, that he did indeed love him, but he says, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And Jesus' response is not, thank you, Peter, I know that you do. But it's a direct command, feed my sheep. And it really should be read, okay, if you do love me, then you will feed my sheep. Peter becomes increasingly annoyed as Jesus asks the question again. And remember again Peter's likely emotional state. He's lived through the horror of having denied Jesus and having had Jesus' own prediction come true. And it's also interesting that just as Peter denied Jesus 3 times, Jesus asked Peter 3 times, do you love me? The second question is responded to with the same, yes, Lord, I love you. Feed my lambs. And one time, Jesus asks him, "Do you love me?" "Yes, Lord." This time clearly annoyed. "I love you." You know, that happens a lot in relationships that we've been in. We think that our loved ones will read our minds and know what it is that we need to feel loved and affirmed. And as you know, if you're in any kind of relationship, marriage or otherwise, reading minds doesn't always work. When people don't understand how we receive love, or if they're not clear about how we express love, communication doesn't happen. Love isn't received in the way it was intended or given. And we can go above and beyond and think we've done all we can do to let someone know that we really care. And they simply, because that's not their language, they don't get it. And both sides of the equation are frustrated, just as Jesus and Peter. Well, Jesus' love language is not just acts of kindness, because Jesus does not desire that we do good for him. The way in which Jesus tells us that he will know that we love him is if we take care of others. He is not really interested in Peter's plea, his impassioned cry that, "Yes, I love you," this pledge of devotion. Jesus wasn't interested in organizational structures. He wasn't interested in people building churches. He wasn't even interested in people having awesome worship services. During our Wednesday night service, our conversation that we're calling Feed the Body and Soul, we've begun a new series, Who is Jesus in Today's World? And one of the things that we talked about this past week was the difference between the earliest Christians who focused on doing as a way of demonstrating that they were believers in Jesus Christ, and the church that existed after Constantine, the Emperor of Rome, made Christianity the church of the empire. And there were creeds that were developed that sought to develop orthodoxy. Everybody needed to have a consistent set of beliefs. We know these creeds. The Apostolic Creed, I believe in God the Father and in Jesus Christ, his only begotten Son. We've heard those creeds and we've said them over and over. If you're in various denominations, those creeds are more or less important in ritual. But there was a distinct difference between these very first Christians and the later church, in that the early church had a fire for doing and being a living and tangible witness to what Jesus had proclaimed. All they asked was that people understand that Jesus was indeed the Messiah, the promised one, to be baptized believing in him, and then to live out the things that he had told them to do. So what does Jesus really mean when he says, "Feed my lambs, feed my sheep"? We're called to love others. We're called to serve as he served. Jesus engaged in sort of radical relationships in his day. He talked to women when no one else would talk to women openly without proper introduction or without another man present. He talked to people of other ethnicities and religious affiliations. He had so much interaction of that nature that he was often accused of coming to destroy the law, when in fact he came to really live out the spirit of the law, which was simply to reconcile people to their Creator. He told the disciples on one occasion that they would do even more powerful things than he had done. And he wasn't, I think, not just talking about more miraculous healings, signs, and wonders. We talked in Sunday school this morning about the sending out of the 70 in the Gospel of Luke, and they come back and they're like, "Lord, the spirits bow down to us," just like they did, and to you, and they were very proud of themselves that they had been able to effect some sort of miraculous stuff happening. And Jesus' response to them is, don't be so bold and proud about what you've been able to do in that sense. But he says, be glad that your names are written in heaven. And what he meant by that was simply that you have this relationship with God that I've been trying to model before you. Jesus, I think, meant that they would do more in terms of radical relationship with people. that there would be more of this engaging with people all over the world. In fact, he says, go into all the world and make disciples and teach them the things that I've taught you. Not just the things that I've said, but the things that you've seen me do. Jesus never excluded anybody. He never condemned anybody. That's kind of radical. And the disciples were actually going to have the ability to go farther in the world than Jesus ever did. Jesus never left the area where he was born. He never traveled more than about 25 or 30 miles from the place where he was born. And yet each of the disciples would find themselves on other continents. And here we are in the United States of America, North America, South America, Asia. There's not a continent in the world now where there are not believers in Jesus as the Lord and Savior. Jesus had in mind a pretty radical movement, not just a declaration of devotion. And so if we really want Jesus to know how much we love him, we need to speak the language in which he hears that love, the language in which he sees that love, and the language in which he recognizes that love. He was not a member of the religious status quo. He was not a member of the social status quo in the Jewish community, and definitely not in the Roman world that oppressed his own people. Do you understand how Jesus wants us to love others? Do you understand how Jesus wants us to love him? Yes, we love Jesus. And if we really do, we've got to learn to speak the language that he's given us and told us what will be meaningful to him. If you love me, feed my sheep. It will mean more than just saying so. It will mean more than even coming to worship, and it will mean more than even coming to feed the body and soul or Sunday school. It will mean engaging in all the work that this church does and thinking about new ways to do work. It will mean bearing witness by visiting the sick, praying for others, by being the kind of neighbor and colleague that Jesus would want us to be. It will mean caring for new faces and new families. It will mean that we understand that every way in which we move and have our being in the world allows us to speak Jesus' love language, that we will be his presence in the community. You know how it goes. If you really love someone, you really want to show them that you love them, you figure out what they really like. Walter has a wonderful analogy that he uses in worship conferences. He says that my wife loves peach roses and chocolate, although these days I have to do sugar-free chocolate. But it used to be that in his travels, wherever he would go, he would bring me back chocolate from that part of the world. And he would say, if my wife tells me that she loves chocolate and peach roses, and if I bring her peanut brittle and dandelions, I'm not going to get very far. She won't understand what I've done. And it's the same thing with Jesus. If he tells us to feed a sheep, and we choose to do other things that aren't as important to him as taking care of others and loving others, Jesus is really not going to get it, I don't think. We'll be majoring in things that he never said were as important to him. Well, we've got to do the same with Jesus. We've got to figure out what his roses and chocolates really are. And his roses and chocolates are love and service. I hope we work and continue to speak Jesus' own love language.